They left her for dead in the desert, knife wound between her shoulder blades, GPS tracker ripped away, communications severed, blood soaking into the sand while her own team drove away, certain she'd never walk again. But what Sergeant Victor Daniels didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Lieutenant Commander Alexis Kaine had survived worse than him. And this time, she wasn't just coming back, she was coming back with a plan. The sun hadn't risen yet over the Mojave training range when Kaine knelt beside the weapons cache, her gloved fingers moving with surgical precision. The briefing had been simple, too simple. Joint training exercise, 4-person team, retrieve classified equipment from a remote outpost. Standard protocol, except nothing about this mission felt standard, not with Daniels leading it. She'd known Victor Daniels for 6 years, knew his record, 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. Decorated Marine Sergeant, with commendations for valor and a reputation for getting things done. But she also knew what the official record didn't say. The village in Helmand Province, 3 dead civilians, no weapons found, an investigation that went nowhere because Daniels had friends, the kind of friends who made problems disappear. Kaine had been the one to file that report, fresh out of SEAL training, young, idealistic, believing the system would work if you just followed the rules. The investigation concluded in 48 hours. Insufficient evidence. Case closed. And Daniels, he'd looked at her across the briefing room, with eyes that promised a reckoning. Careful who you cross, Lieutenant, he'd said. Memory's a long thing in this business. That was 6 years ago. She'd rebuilt her career inch by inch, earned her promotion through flawless service, buried the Helmand incident deep, until 3 days ago when the assignment roster came through. Joint training exercise, team leader, Sergeant Victor Daniels. The past wasn't done with her yet. Now they moved through the pre-dawn darkness. Kaine, Daniels, and 2 Marines she didn't know. Corporal Jake Torres and Private First Class Maya Chen, both young, both watching Daniels like he was carved from granite and wisdom. The outpost emerged from the desert like a wound. Corrugated metal walls, blast damage from previous exercises, sand drifting against every surface. Chen, Torres, secure the perimeter, Daniels ordered. Kaine and I will retrieve the package. Standard protocol, nothing unusual, except the way Daniels positioned himself, always behind her, always just out of her peripheral vision. Inside the outpost, the package sat exactly where intelligence said it would be, a reinforced case, biometric locks. Kaine knelt to verify the contents while Daniels stood guard. That's when she heard it, the whisper of steel leaving leather. Combat instinct screamed. She started to turn, too late. The blade punched through her tactical vest, found the gap between armor plates, drove deep into muscle and tissue. Pain exploded white-hot through her chest. Her vision grayed. She hit the concrete floor hard enough to crack teeth. Nothing personal, Kaine, Daniels said, his voice eerily calm. Just business. You should have stayed out of my affairs back in Helmand. He yanked the blade free. Agony lanced through her spine. Chen, Torres, targets down, hostile eliminated. We're extracting. Through the haze of pain, Kaine heard the mentor, heard Chen's sharp intake of breath. Sir, that's Lieutenant Commander Kaine. She's dead. Daniels cut her off. Took a round from a simulated, hostile, tragic accident. You saw it happen. Both of you. Understood. Silence. Then Torres, uncertain. Sir, I don't think. That wasn't a question, Private. You follow my orders, or you explain to a board of inquiry how you failed to protect a superior officer. Your choice. More silence, then footsteps, receding. The clang of metal doors, vehicle engines starting, fading into distance, and silence. Absolute, perfect, deadly. Kaine lay in spreading blood, counting heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, not dead yet. 4, 5, 6, won't I hear? 7, 8, 9, not like this. She rolled onto her side, each movement an exercise in controlled agony, her medkit still attached to her belt. Daniels had been thorough but not perfect. With shaking fingers, she found the compression bandages, applied pressure to the wound. The bleeding slowed but didn't stop. She needed real medical attention. Soon, but first, she needed to survive the next 6 hours. The Mojave Desert killed people faster than bullets. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, wildlife, distance. She was 20 miles from base, injured, without communications, without GPS, without anyone knowing she was still breathing. Daniels had planned this perfectly. An accident during training, a tragedy. No one would question his version of events, not at first. By the time anyone thought to ask hard questions, it would be too late. Kaine forced herself to standing, legs threatening to buckle. The outpost had a small storeroom, emergency supplies. She found water, protein bars, a first aid kit with antibiotics, and something else, a flare gun. Not much, but it was something. As the sun climbed higher, turning the desert into an oven, Kaine began the longest walk of her life. One step, breathe. Another step, breathe. Count the breaths. Control the pain. Her SEAL instructors had broken it down to science. Pain was information. Process it. Don't let it control you. Use it. Every step away from that outpost was another piece of evidence that Victor Daniels had made a critical mistake. He'd underestimated her, assumed the wound would be fatal, assumed she'd die alone in the desert while he spun his story. He'd forgotten the first rule of warfare. Never assume your enemy is finished until you see the body. By noon, Kaine had covered 3 miles. Her strength was fading. The compression bandage had slowed the bleeding, but not stopped it. Blood loss made her dizzy. The heat pressed down like a physical weight. Vultures circled overhead. Patient, knowing, she kept moving. 4 miles. 5. The terrain shifted gradually. More rocks, sparse vegetation, signs of an old mining operation. Abandoned equipment half buried in sand. And then, salvation. A weathered trailer, decades old, windows covered with plywood, but the door opened. Inside, the trailer was stripped bare. No furniture, no supplies, but there was a roof, shade, shelter from the killing sun. Kaine collapsed against the wall, allowing herself 60 seconds of weakness. Then she opened the first aid kit, bit down on a strip of leather she'd found, and began the brutal work of properly cleaning and binding the wound. The antibiotics came next, military grade, strong enough to hold off infection, if she was lucky. Pain medication too, though she took only half the recommended dose. Needed to stay alert, needed to think clearly, because surviving the desert was only step 1. Step 2 was much harder, proving what Daniels had done. As darkness fell and temperature plummeted, Kaine reviewed her options. Direct confrontation wouldn't work. It was her word against his. A decorated sergeant versus a junior officer with a history of filing complaints. The system would protect Daniels. It always had. No, she needed evidence, leverage, something so undeniable that even his friends couldn't make it disappear. The package, whatever was in that case, Daniels had been so eager to secure. That was the key. This wasn't just about silencing an enemy. This was about covering up something bigger. The next morning, despite every instinct screaming to rest, Kaine began moving again, not toward base, toward the extraction point where Daniels would have taken the package. 7 miles northeast, through terrain that would break a healthy person. She made it by sunset, collapsing behind a rock formation with a clear view of the dirt road below, and waited. Patience, another lesson from SEAL training. Sometimes the best action was no action. Sometimes you just watched, listened, gathered intelligence. 3 hours after dark, headlights appeared. A civilian truck, no military markings. It stopped exactly where Kaine had predicted. Daniels emerged from the driver's side. Another figure from the passenger side. Tall, well-dressed, definitely not military. They met at the truck bed. Daniels lifted out the case. The civilian opened a briefcase. Even from her elevated position, Kaine could see the contents. Cash, lots of it. The exchange took 90 seconds. Case for cash, handshake, both vehicles departing in opposite directions. Kaine photographed everything with the camera function on the emergency beacon she'd found in the trailer. Low quality, grainy, but recognizable. Proof. Now came the hardest part, getting back to base without Daniels knowing she was alive. Because if he discovered she'd survived, he'd finish the job properly. No mistakes this time. Kaine waited until the tail lights disappeared completely. Then she began the long journey back. This time, she had purpose beyond survival. She had evidence, she had leverage, and she had a plan. It took her 2 more days to reach the base perimeter. 2 days of careful movement, of avoiding search patrols, of staying invisible. When she finally approached the main gate, it was 0400. Change of guard, maximum confusion, perfect timing. The sentries' reactions were immediate. Weapons raised, challenges shouted, then recognition, shock. Lieutenant Commander Kaine, ma'am, we thought you were dead, she finished. I know. I need to see Colonel Harper now, and I need it done quietly. No announcements, no alerts. Is that clear, ma'am? Protocol requires you follow a direct order from a superior officer, Corporal Colonel Harper, immediately. Off the record, 20 minutes later, Kaine sat in Colonel Marcus Harper's private office. The base commander studied her with eyes that had seen too many wars to be easily surprised. But even he looked shaken. They said you were killed in action during the training exercise, Harper said carefully. Sergeant Daniels reported that hostiles had infiltrated the outpost. Said you died protecting the objective. Daniels lied, Kaine replied flatly. He stabbed me, left me to die, then reported it as a training accident. Harper's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. That's a serious accusation, Commander. I have evidence. The wound itself will show it was made by a blade, not a bullet. The trajectory is wrong for hostile fire. And I have photographs of Daniels selling classified equipment to a civilian buyer. She placed the emergency beacon on Harper's desk, pulled up the grainy photos. Harper studied them in silence. When he looked up, his face had hardened into something resembling granite. Do you know what this means? Yes, sir. It means Daniels isn't just a murderer. He's a traitor. Harper picked up his phone, made a series of calls, each one brief, coded. Within the hour, Kaine was in the medical bay, being examined by doctors sworn to secrecy. Military police were securing evidence. And most importantly, Daniels was being watched, not arrested. Not yet, because arresting him too soon would spook whoever else was involved in his operation. Harper wanted the whole network. That meant patience. That meant letting Daniels think he'd gotten away with it. That meant using Kaine as bait. You don't have to do this, Harper told her 3 days later. The medical team had patched her up. The wound was healing, but she was still weak, still recovering. I do, Kaine replied. This is the only way to catch everyone involved. Daniels won't make another move unless he thinks I'm actually dead. We leaked the story, made it official. Memorial service scheduled. My family notified. As far as anyone knows, I died 3 days ago in that outpost. Harper nodded slowly. And when Daniels discovers the truth, then we see who he contacts, who he warns. Who else is part of this? It's dangerous. Everything worth doing is. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Kaine would remain dead, while military intelligence traced Daniels' contacts, followed his communications, mapped his network. She'd stay in a secure facility, recovering, preparing, waiting for the moment to strike. 1 week passed, then 2. The investigation expanded. Daniels' network was larger than anyone had suspected. 3 other soldiers on the base, 2 civilian contractors, 1 Pentagon official, all involved in stealing and selling classified military technology. The case Daniels had stolen contained prototype encryption software, worth millions on the black market. Worth lives in the wrong hands. Finally, Harper gave the order. We've identified all major players. Time to move. The arrests happened simultaneously. Coordinated raids across 3 states. Daniels was taken in his quarters, still confident he'd gotten away with murder. The look on his face when Kaine walked into the interrogation room made everything worth it. Hello, Sergeant, she said calmly. We need to talk. Daniels went pale, then red, then pale again. How did I survive? Kaine took the seat across from him. Same way I survive everything. By being better prepared than my enemies. By never giving up. And by remembering that the truth always comes out eventually. This is insane. You can't prove anything. We have the knife with your fingerprints. We have medical evidence showing the wound was deliberately placed to avoid immediate death. We have photographs of you selling classified equipment. We have testimony from Chen and Torres. Once they realized they were accessories to attempted murder. We have everything. Daniels, his face contorted, rage, fear, desperation cycling through like stages of grief. 6 years, he spat. 6 years you've been a thorn in my side. Always by the book. Always doing the right thing. You should have learned to keep your mouth shut. Is that what you told those civilians in Helmand? Kaine's voice remained steady. Before you killed them, they were collaborating with the enemy. They were farmers. You don't know what it's like out there, making impossible decisions, living with consequences. You're right. I don't know what it's like to murder innocent people and sell out my country for cash. But I know what it's like to do my job, to honor my oath, to put duty before personal gain. That's the difference between us, Daniels. You forgot what the uniform means. The trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming. Daniels received 30 years, military prison, dishonorable discharge, every commendation stripped, his network dismantled piece by piece. Chen and Torres received lighter sentences in exchange for cooperation. Both would serve 5 years then be discharged. Not enough for their role in leaving Kaine for dead, but enough to end their military careers. Enough to send a message. 6 months later, Kaine stood on a stage at Coronado Naval Base. Admiral Patricia Morrison pinned new rank insignia on her collar. Captain, not just a promotion, a statement. Captain Alexis Kaine, Morrison announced to the assembled crowd, represents the highest ideals of naval service. When faced with betrayal, she chose justice. When left for dead, she chose survival. When tempted by revenge, she chose the law. Her actions exemplify what it means to be a Navy SEAL. The applause was thunderous, but Kaine barely heard it. She was thinking about Daniels, about the knife in her back, about crawling through the desert, about the choice she'd made in that interrogation room. She could have shot him in the outpost, could have claimed self-defense, could have taken revenge right there, but she hadn't. She'd chosen the harder path, the right path, the path that exposed not just one traitor, but an entire network. After the ceremony, a young ensign approached her, nervous, eager. "Ma'am, I followed your career. What you did, surviving that attack, building the case, taking down that whole operation, it's incredible. How did you know the right thing to do?" Kaine considered the question carefully. "I didn't. Not always. There were 100 moments where the wrong choice would have been easier, faster, more satisfying. But my father taught me something before he died." "What's that, ma'am?" "He said the measure of a person isn't what they do when everyone's watching. It's what they do when no one would ever know. When you're alone in the desert bleeding, with every reason to take revenge, that's when character matters. That's when you find out who you really are." The ensign nodded slowly, processing this. "And who are you, Captain?" Kaine smiled. "Someone who keeps her promises. Someone who honors her oath. Someone who believes the system works, if you work the system. Not perfectly, not easily, but eventually. Justice is slow, but it's thorough, and it always arrives." That night, alone in her quarters, Kaine pulled out a folder she'd kept locked away. Inside were photos from Helmand Province, the village, the 3 dead civilians. The investigation that went nowhere. For 6 years, she'd carried the weight of that failure. The knowledge that Daniels had escaped justice. The fear that corruption was too embedded to fight. But she'd been wrong. The system had worked, slowly, painfully, but it had worked because she'd made it work. Because she'd refused to accept that some people were above the law, because she'd been willing to pay the price for doing what was right. Kaine placed the photos in her desk drawer, closed it, locked it. The past was finally settled. The dead were finally avenged. Not through revenge, not through violence, but through justice. Real justice, the kind that exposes darkness and restores faith in the institutions meant to protect us all. Outside her window, the Pacific Ocean stretched infinite under starlight. Somewhere out there, other battles were being fought. Other people were facing choices between right and easy. Other warriors were learning what she'd learned in that desert. That survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about staying true. It's about maintaining honor, even when honor costs everything. It's about refusing to let betrayal turn you into the thing you're fighting against. Navy SEALs don't need a weapon to defeat their enemies. Sometimes all they need is patience, evidence, and the absolute certainty that truth matters more than revenge. That's the lesson Victor Daniels learned too late. That's the lesson Alexis Kaine carried with her every day. That's the lesson that separates warriors from killers. 1 year later, Kaine received a new assignment, Special Operations Command, investigating corruption within Special Forces units. Her experience had made her uniquely qualified. Her reputation preceded her. The woman who'd come back from the dead to expose treason. The SEAL who'd chosen justice over vengeance. The officer who'd proven the system could work. She accepted without hesitation, because there were more Daniels out there. More corruption to root out, more betrayals to expose. And now she had the authority, the resources, and the experience to do something about it. As she prepared for her new role, Kaine thought back to that moment in the outpost, the knife entering her back, the certainty of death, the choice to survive, not just physically but morally. That choice had defined everything that followed, had led her here, had given her purpose beyond mere survival. She touched the scar on her back. It would never fade completely, neither would the memory. But that was okay. Scars were reminders, proof that you survived, evidence that you overcame. Kaine had survived betrayal, exposure, and the desert itself. She'd overcome corruption, bureaucracy, and the temptation of revenge. She'd proven that honor still mattered, that oaths still meant something, that one person refusing to stay silent could change everything. And now she would make sure no one else had to survive what she'd survived. No one else had to choose between revenge and justice while bleeding in the desert. No one else had to face betrayal alone, because she would be there, watching, investigating, ensuring that the Victor Daniels of the world faced consequences for their actions. The system wasn't perfect. It was slow, bureaucratic, and sometimes maddeningly opaque, but it worked. If you worked it, if you refused to give up, if you believed that truth and justice were worth fighting for, that's the real story. Not about a SEAL who survived impossible odds, but about a warrior who refused to let betrayal corrupt her values, who chose the hard right over the easy wrong, who proved that sometimes the greatest act of defiance is simply refusing to become the thing you hate. If this story moved you, hit that like button, drop a comment about a time you chose integrity over convenience, and subscribe, because every week I bring you true stories of courage, sacrifice, and the warriors who show us what honor really means. Remember, revenge is temporary, justice is eternal, and the warriors who understand the difference are the ones who change the world. Stay strong, stay honorable, and never let betrayal steal your values.